Our next presenter is Erik Mathy. Are you here, Erik, and with
Yeah,
us?
absolutely. Jonathan, dude, man, hard act to follow up. I'm just gonna say. I mean, I'm not supposed to say anything until like later and ask questions and stuff, but um, fabulous for real. Um, just gonna say that. So let's see here. Let me share my screen. I think most of you know me. Um, so actually, let me start with this. So I have too many windows open right now. I'll just go to my desktop. All right. Does everybody see that?
You can see that. We can
You
see
can
the
see me,
presenter.
seeing you, seeing me. Okay. Which is really annoying, actually. Probably not the best idea I've ever had, but um,
My screen's frozen. No.
there we go. All right.
Okay.
So let's start with this. So my name is Erik Mathy, and a few of you know me. I live in Alameda. I went to school for photojournalism a long time ago in land far, far away, and returned to film photography in particular maybe 6 or 7 years back as I started to do a lot of long distance bicycle trips. I've ridden all sorts of stuff. But Jonathan, one of the things that you said that really struck me, because I do a lot of that myself, is a few years back I rode Route 66 from Chicago to LA with a 4x5 film camera. You know, and what you said about these road trips and these, when you travel and you have sort of an itinerary, but the joy of it, or the people that you meet along the way, they're just sort of random, is very much the truth of it. So once I started doing that, I decided more recently that I wanted to start to do work that was more meaningful, that kind of got back to my photojournalism roots. And the most recent one that I did, some of you might have seen some of it at one of the last show and tells, but they weren't all done, was I flew to Oklahoma a few months ago, just before COVID actually hit, to do a story that's based on the land runs of Oklahoma, which is when they essentially took the Oklahoma Territory, which was Indian territory. It's where they relocated most of the Native Americans, the 5 civilized tribes from Mississippi, the opposite coast, the Navajo, all sorts of tribes. There were 5 tribes that were native to that area, and there's something like over 20 tribes that relocated to that area. But after the Civil War, they broke it all up, opened it up to essentially white settlers to land run and homestead in a series of events they called the land runs. And as a result, Oklahoma's got a really fractured, very, very bad past that is reflected forward into today. And the reason I got caught up into it is because a friend of mine moved to Oklahoma. He opened up a bicycle shop, and being a very enthusiastic guy, started running a bicycle race, a 100-mile bicycle race on the local roads that he called the Land Run 100. Like Brian Brooks has heard of this, maybe a few other people in the crowd who are bicyclists have heard this race. It became world famous. And then a couple of years later, people are like, you know, that name is completely racist, right? And he was like, wait, what? What do you mean? And they're like, yeah, the land runs, they're completely racist. You got to change that. And it opened up this whole thing in the bicycle community in particular about historic events, inclusion, and like how far do we go to be inclusive, and do we have to really listen to the voices from the past? Are they that big of a deal? And all kinds of things. So I decided I'd go there and I would spend the week prior to the race interviewing people who had something to do with either the historic event, the historic land run, or the current land run, and had a relevant point of view, as many of them from as many different places as possible. And it turned into this story that I named Echoes of Futures Past. So I'll put this into, after I'm done showing the work, I'll put this link into the chat, and if people want to go and look at the images, it's a series of really long interviews. I spent anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, in some cases 2 hours, which with each of the folks that I interviewed. And it was everything from a brother and sister who still work the homesteaded land that their great-grandfather land run in 1893, to a member of the Choctaw tribe who's a retired assistant district attorney, who's actually against changing the land run name. He was totally fine with the land run name. To a much younger artist member of, which I can't remember which tribe off the top of my head, who was really key to getting the name changed, right? And then also people from the bicycle industry and all sorts of things. So, and this will lead to other projects that I plan on doing in the future. So when I do these types of trips, these types of stories, I try to be as period correct as I can. So in this case, I made images on 4x5 camera with X-ray film because it's orthochromatic. It mimics the look and feel of the type of photography medium that was available in the 1890s when the land runs actually happened. And I use a brass lens from 1892 that I modified. I replaced the front element with one of my own elements. I actually build my own camera lenses. And so this was a modified 1892 lens that I made to sort of behave the way that I like my lenses to behave. And I went out and I used that because I wanted the images to be somewhat period correct. So this particular shot is actually on the Land Run 100 course. I tried to interview everybody that I interviewed was for the most part on the course itself. I did my best to try to stay within the confines of the race course itself, the 100 miles. This is an old bridge that's no longer sustainable for car traffic. So they piled up blacktop, closed the road, but the bike race went up and over this really cool old trestle bridge that heads into actually Crow lands under the Crow, I believe it's the Crow reservation. But it's one of my favorite shots from the piece. This is
Mine too.
Huh?
Mine too. Love that shot.
Thanks, man. Yeah, this is Friar Aidan. He's a young guy, former actually attorney. He was a lawyer, and he became a priest in this little religious community outside of, that's on the course near Stillwater, Oklahoma. This is all based around Stillwater, Oklahoma. And the reason I interviewed him is, well, several reasons. One is they're a Protestant order, and the Protestants actually have one of their saints was a member of one of the Native American tribes in Oklahoma. His name is Okerhater was his Native American name. He was a warrior, a Navajo warrior, who was captured by the U.S. Army in the late 1800s. He had led and participated in several battles against the U.S. Army. He was captured, sent off to Florida, into prison. He converted to Christianity, became a priest, went back to Oklahoma and opened up a small church, but also a school, purely for Indian youth, so they wouldn't be separated from their families, but they would still get an education. At the time, a lot of the schools are called Indian schools, are run by either the federal government or private individuals, and they were essentially cultural genocide. So I wanted to talk to him because their particular order not only had a saint who was a Navajo warrior, but also had several members of their community who were also members of various tribes. And they're returning 85 acres of their land to native Oklahoma flora and fauna. Most of Oklahoma is not native prairie anymore. It's all like hay or oil fields, everything else. So it was a fairly significant thing to take 85 acres that they made money off of. I just completely return it back to native prairie land. And he was a really interesting guy. And also he's an Oklahoma native. So there are a lot of levels that I wanted to talk to him about. Yeah, I mean, his points were essentially that they don't teach history in Oklahoma past the land runs. Like Oklahoma history in high school goes to the land run or to statehood, and it stops. They don't really talk about the land as it was used by the Native Americans, what was there before the settlers came and sort of took it over. And they still have, he said, his little brother is in high school, and the high school's mascot is the Redskins. And he's just like, how can we have this history and not talk about it? But we don't talk about it. So he was a really, really great guy. I'm not a portrait photographer. I don't feel I'm very good at portraits. And this particular shot, he had this great hat on. and it was completely covering his eyes, and we were sort of joking around, and I was like, you gotta, can you move your hat? And as he was moving it, and it got a little bit light into his eyes, and I think I said something vaguely witty, not that witty. He laughed out of pity, really, but he had a little chuckle, and I quick took the shot. And luckily, this one came out. So I was pretty happy when I saw this image come through.
I'm gonna say he saved with that fierce beard, and that's
Yeah,
not
dude, his beard is fierce, and the hat is awesome. I can't. He's an Andrew Law of Oklahoma. So that's another joke for Brian. He's a friend of ours. And this is a shot of the prairie land that's been returned to natural prairie. Their end goal is in 4 or 5 years, when that's tall enough that you can't see as you walk through it, to cut mazes through it, and also for all of the Oklahoma natural wildlife to come back and repopulate their prairie land. This guy, he is one of my favorites. He actually gave me this book. His name's Tyson Branyon. He is a member of the Choctaw tribe. He is a retired district attorney for Payne County, and he's written every edition of this Land Run 100, which was renamed to the Mid-South race, and he was adamantly against the name change. And I was very, very happy to find somebody who was a member of one of the local tribes who had that viewpoint, because it wasn't hard when Bobby, the race organizer, he decided to change the name, and a lot of people were up in arms about, why would you do that? And it's not hard to find, no offense to anybody in the crowd, to find an angry white guy who says, well, history's not so bad. How can you forget the history? I mean, we hear these viewpoints, in the South for the Southern War memorials, all this stuff. And I didn't really want to, I mean, it's a valid, it's not necessarily a valid viewpoint, but I didn't really want to talk to another one of those folk, right? I wanted to find somebody really interesting to talk to, who had viewpoints that I would never come across. And Tyson, man, Tyson definitely nailed it. His view on changing the name from the Land Run, this historic event, again, that many people feel was deeply and inherently racist, and it was, to something else, was that the local tribes in Oklahoma have much bigger things to worry about than the name of a bike race. He's like, the federal government has lost hundreds of millions of dollars from the trust, and we get pennies on the dollar in settlements. I'm worried about that. I'm worried about this case in front of the Supreme Court that could tear away all of our rights. I'm worried about that. Am I worried about the name of a bike race? No, I'm not worried about the name of a bike race. And the other two things he said that I thought were super interesting was, one, his grandmother, who was a native Choctaw speaker first, who became the first woman and the first Native American to become the chair of the Democratic Party in Payne County, cheered for every team that had a Native American mascot, because her viewpoint was, it's better that they acknowledge us and that we exist and that they cheer for some part of our culture than they forget us and we fade away and die because nobody knows what we were anymore. And he also shared that belief. And the other thing that he said that was really pointed was like, listen, all these young folks on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter saying, yeah, change his name, that's good. He's like, none of them knew the history of the Land Run until somebody said something to him about it. And none of them cared. Are any of them going out and helping the tribes now? Are they actually doing something meaningful to help us in our daily life? Are they packing up and leaving and giving us our land back? No. He's like, this is virtue signaling.
Yeah, heard.
They make themselves feel really good, but they're not doing anything for us. He's like, and so it's bullshit. He was a great interviewer, a great interview. Former district attorneys are pretty eloquent. And I'll come back to him because he's having a heavy influence on the next project I'm going to do along these lines. This is one of the bridges over the Oklahoma River. The race goes right underneath it. And I liked the shot. And this is also part of the race. It goes through a lot of mud and dirt. The race edition this year was utterly brutal. Like, it's kind of amazing a lot of the bikes even survived. It was just complete wreckage. That's a stream crossing that's like 2 feet deep with mud on either side. Also completely brutal. Because I wanted to capture, the ruggedness of the land. Like, Oklahoma is not this beautiful place. A lot of the tribes were, again, relocated from Mississippi and New York and these really beautiful, fertile grounds. And Oklahoma is pretty in its own way, but it's not great land. The Choctaw, when they went to Oklahoma to check it out, were like, well, it's pretty, but it sucks. And we have to take it because we don't have a choice, but this is not an equal trade. And they definitely weren't wrong. But the gravel roads, man, they go forever, and they are something else. Oklahoma is definitely something else. So this is the homestead of the next photo, the couple in the next photo, this brother and sister. This was founded in 1893, the landowner of 1893, by the great-grandfather and great-uncle of these two folks. That is Sharon and, what's her brother's name? Carl. Great people. He's been farming his whole life. She retired from a school district and picked up farming. And they learned all these stories from the knee of their great-grandmother, and some from their great-grandfather. And their great-uncle printed this great collection of stories from that period of time, which is like central to Oklahoma's historical society. And it was interesting because there's this kind of mythos around the Landrunners, the Sooners, actually. One of the things I learned in this project is the Oklahoma Sooners, that nickname came from the fact that a bunch of people jumped over before the land run happened and squatted on the land ahead of time. They went too soon. And that became central to the state's identity. Like, that's something they're proud of. The Oklahoma Sooners essentially means thieves.
Yeah, they snake that shit.
Yeah. And one of their great grandfather's stories is like, he didn't cheat. He came over, and the property that he wanted was already squatted on by some dude who'd obviously been there for days. And the other interesting part of the mythos is that everybody who went out there were really hard scrabble. They were poor. It was their last chance. And for some folks, that was definitely the case. But their ancestors, they had their great uncle and their great grandfather, they had nice homes in New Jersey. They were established. They came out for the excitement. They got caught up in it. And they wanted a large piece of property for themselves. They weren't farmers. But they came out, they did tenant farming starting in Kansas for a little while. And then when the land runs open up, they came for the land run. But they weren't poor. I mean, they were poor once they homesteaded. It was a damn hard life, and they worked incredibly hard. So there's something to be said for that. But they weren't poor when they made the choice. And so a lot of that myth around the rugged hardscrabble Wild West has a certain amount of romantic falseness to it. Like a lot of America. They're very kind. I spent literally 2.5 hours with them. They're really lovely folks. I very much enjoyed the interview. But they were proud of the land runs, and they're proud of their ancestors coming out and taking part in them. This gentleman, he's a Native American artist, and somebody's chatting. Okay, yeah, 5 more minutes, sorry. And he was behind the actual name change itself. He raised the issue with Bobby and had a conversation with Bobby, and was completely central to getting the name changed from the Land Run 100 to the Mid-South. And his point, he's an ultra endurance runner, and his point was, every time you restage this, you're recreating the land run itself. And you're just, rubbing us in it and just reliving those wounds and just opening them up and tearing them open again and again and again. And it's bullshit. He's like, and what's worse than genocide? Because that's what you're bragging about. Oklahoma is filled with oil fields. They're sink or swim. Right now they're back to crap. There were like 300 earthquakes in Oklahoma from fracking a couple years ago. So in that way as well, Oklahoma is a battleground for cultural issues and ecological issues, but you can't go anywhere without oil. And this is inside the church at the little religious order, St. Francis of the Woods, that I went and interviewed Father Aidan at. This is the outside of Bobby's bike shop, the weekend of the race. I also try to do documentary work. I'm not just shooting portraits and scenics. I try to, since I was there for the race, I also photographed the race prep, the start of the race itself, the scene around, it's Oklahoma, so there's lots of big trucks, lots of American flags, lots of patriotism, lots of POW stuff. And then the after of the race, where racers are coming in completely shelled, wrapped up in space blankets, drinking anything warm they could get, covered with mud, and just completely messed up, barely able to walk, barely able to talk, barely able to function. The race is hard. And this is Lindsay Belichenko. She's the director of marketing for Salsa Bicycles, which is the largest sponsor of the race. And she's also the first director level woman at Salsa as a brand. And so she had a lot to say about inclusiveness in cycling and how do you bring more people in and how do you open up the tent for folks. And her point was listen, if you have the opportunity to let more people participate, to make more people feel welcome, why wouldn't you? She's like, why would you say no to that? So the name change for them, for Salsa, who spend a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars probably on this event, was a no-brainer. They're like, yeah, change it. Let's do it. And so she was a really great interview around inclusivity and the cycling industry and the path forward and what there is to be done about it without turning people off. And that's Bobby Wintle himself. That's the race organizer. His interview was literally like putting your face into a blast oven for 45 minutes. He's really intense. He hates the establishment. He hates the white guy only viewpoint. And he's like, and I'm part of the problem. He's like, I'm a cis white guy with 2 cars and a garage full of shit and 2 kids and a wife. He's like, but we have to do better. We have to listen. We have to learn. And I have no time for anybody who's too small-minded to understand that.
And not to get all cycly about this, but yeah, that's a problem.
Oh yeah. The cycling industry, for those in the room who aren't cyclists, is completely dominated by upper middle class, middle-aged and older white guys. Like me, except I'm not upper middle class. But yeah, it's completely 100% dominated by white guys. And so the blow to say, screw that, let's open this thing up was a really big deal. Because again, this race is world famous. People fly from Australia to participate in a 1-day race. It's a pretty amazing scene. And so that's it. And I'll put the link into the chat for everybody to go through and read it and look at. And the follow-up to this is Tyson gave me this really great book about a fictional member of the Choctaw tribe during the 1830s, when the Choctaw were the first tribe to go on the Trail of Tears. So next spring, I'm going to ride my bike on the Choctaw Trail of Tears, which is the first Native American Trail of Tears, with an 1840s style box camera that I'm building myself. And I'm going to interview people along the way, Choctaw and non-Choctaw, sort of about the Native American experience, the Trail of Tears, and where we are today, right? How much of the Native Americans of the Choctaw still exist in Mississippi, and how much are they remembered?